In a previous video, we talked about the idea of ludonarrative dissonance, a situation where the story being told by a game's mechanics disagrees with the story being told by a game's narrative, and people had a lot of interesting and curious responses. However, one example that people brought up stood out to me because it demonstrated not a misunderstanding of dissonance, but perhaps a misunderstanding of how games interact with narrative structure. So let's talk about the Stanley parable, Dark Souls, and intended play. The Stanley Parable is a 2011 piece of first-person interactive fiction that revolves around a conflict between the player protagonist Stanley and the game's narrator. As the player works Stanley through the game, the narrator exposits his actions, including immediately upcoming actions that serve as instructions.
When Stanley came to a set of 2 open doors, he entered the door on his left.
The player chooses whether to follow these instructions or to attempt to subvert them in some way.
This was not the correct way to the meeting room, and Stanley knew it perfectly well.
Dark Souls, also published in 2011, is a third-person role-playing game where the player takes on the role of the Chosen Undead, a cursed human tasked via vague prophecy with rekindling the first flame to preserve the Age of Fire. Now, these two games are, all in all, very different from one another, but they're illustrative for our point here because they both utilize elements of intentional disobedience. Games have a dimension of interaction that means there's not merely intended interpretation, but also intended play. The intended interaction with a movie is pretty straightforward. The movie starts and you watch it. There are some subversive or alternative forms of watching, such as riffing a movie or the sing-along or whatever the hell midnight screenings of The Room count as. But generally speaking, it's pretty well bounded. This interaction in games means that games can do something that other media rarely can outside of very experimental context, which is to tell the participant to do one thing while expecting them to do another. The Stanley Parable makes this process overt. The entire interaction paradigm of the game more or less revolves around this single principle, which is what makes it so illustrative. But it's not actually a niche type of interaction. Any open world game has a moment where the player is told to do one thing and can then choose to immediately turn around and go the other direction, opting instead to spend dozens or even hundreds of hours doing anything else but the thing that they were asked to do. Some games address this within the fiction, such as the Assassin's Creed games that suggest the player is playing a somewhat scrambled version of the story's events, that while Ezio may have jumped across all these roofs, he didn't necessarily do it for 5 straight hours one afternoon instead of stabbing minor Borgias in the neck. Others, like Final Fantasy VII, opt to ignore the disconnect entirely, operating on the logic that it's only weird if you call attention to it. Games are constantly telling us to do one thing and then waiting to see if we actually do it. The Stanley Parable uses this to create a conflict between the player and the game, but at the end of the day, that's just a costume put on an otherwise ordinary interaction. The narrator is simply a disembodied antagonist, like Shodan or GLaDOS, and much like GLaDOS, the narrator of the Stanley Parable tells you to do or not do specific things while the game fully expects you to ignore those requests.
Welcome to the final test. When you are done, you will drop the device in the Equipment Recovery Annex.
Now, those examples are all cases where a character within the game issues explicit instructions, and it's pretty clear that disobeying those instructions is core to the game and possibly even the plot. Doing what GLaDOS tells you to do generally results in death.
We are pleased that you made it through the final challenge where we pretended we were going to murder you.
But these two operating layers still exist even in less overt games. Games are constantly telling us through various cues how the game expects us to behave in and interact with its world. This is encapsulated in tutorials, but also environmental communication and reinforcing desired playstyles. The Assassin's Creed games are positively lousy with icons, indicators, and things that blink and glow to draw your eye and encourage interaction. It is a game series that sits on the verge of screaming at you about the many things it wants you to do. As is the case with Dark Souls, the game may simply use standard game language to imply that you shouldn't behave in a certain way, that some NPCs you shouldn't kill because they're your friends, or maybe just your allies, or at the very least, just because they're not your enemies. These characters are friendly, or they sell you things, so you should leave them alone. That, the game says, is the correct way to behave. But that's simply a social contract between you and the game's simulacrum of friends, and the game absolutely intends for you to murder every last one of them. If you go on a rampage in Dark Souls and kill every last friendly NPC, you will actually unlock whole new side stories and dungeons and bosses. This is not simply emergent or procedural, this is intended play. If there is crafted content on the other side of your misbehavior, then it's not actually misbehavior. Because it turns out that murdering everyone is also the correct way to behave. What a game intends for you to do includes not only the things the fiction of the game tells you to do, but also the broader things the game permits you to do. If there is something that the game's author simply flat out 100% did not want you to experience, did not want you to engage in, then it wouldn't be there. Even when it comes to potential misbehavior using the rules of the system you're placed within, externalities that they didn't or couldn't account for, like throwing garbage at NPCs, the only truly accurate sign that the authors don't want you doing that is that nothing happens at all. This is because even a negative reaction, even the game pushing back against misbehavior, is content. This is a big challenge when writing about video games, that the text of a game includes not only the messages intended and implied by the game's explicit plot, and the ideas reinforced by the repetitive mechanical behaviors the game utilizes, but also a variety of potentially dramatically diverging intended postures of play. A reading of Dark Souls must encompass not just the nominal story, but also a breadth of possibilities and how those possibilities alter the reading. This added complexity means that games as texts are harder to encompass, but it also means that games as a medium provide a potentially far denser package for meaning than other forms. And I understand why this trips people up. This idea that doing something the game is telling you not to do is in fact what the game wants you to do, because it's something the game's authors have accounted for and have programmed it to respond to. It's the treachery of images, but the treachery of content. C'est ce n'est pas teneur. So what do you think? What's your favorite moment in a game where it tells you not to do something that it ultimately intends for you to do, and why is it the genocide route in Undertale? Let me know in the comments.